Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force. I am your host, Sarah.
And I'm your host, Brad.
And on today's episode of the Acolyte Appetite, we are talking about episode number 3, entitled Destiny. We are hyped. How many pages of notes do you have, Brad?
I got 4 pages of notes. How many pages do you have, Sarah? I said that backwards.
I got 5 pages of notes, Brad. Let's go.
That's 9. And guess how many episodes are in this season? 8. And you take 9 minus 8 and guess what that gets you? 1. And guess what? The power of 1, the power of 2, the power of many. Let's get this thing rolling.
Wow.
This episode is directed by Kogonada, written by Jasmyne Flournoy and Eileen Shim. This is a banger. We're getting in the meat potatoes of the Acolyte, Sarah.
That's right.
And it's been a couple weeks since the premiere. Like, we rewatched last week for our recording.
Right.
But it's been 4 weeks since we've had new Star Wars content for us. And it felt like a really long 4 weeks. So I was very excited to kind of join everybody in the special Tuesday night moment to be like, ooh, what's next? Because we didn't know what was next. It was exciting. It was a good moment.
That's right. And I got to tell you, can I tell you my very chaotic Tuesday night experience?
Sure.
Okay. The very chaotic Tuesday night experience was that I get done with work a little bit late. I forget what I'm doing. I'm doing something where I'm unable to watch this episode when it drops. And at the same time this is happening, guys, Jin from BTS is coming home from the military. The news report said he'd be out between 7 and 8 a.m. I was like, oh my God, it's between 7 and 8 a.m. right now. I'm going to lose my mind. And then the photos started dropping on the timeline from his discharge moment. And I'm like, I've got to be there for Jin's live. I've got to be there for Jin's first live back. Okay. I promise we're getting somewhere, guys. And so I turn on this episode late. You text me and you're like, whoa. And I'm like, say no more. I haven't seen it yet. I'm behind. And so I get 8 minutes in, and then I get the live notification of Jin. And I'm like, sorry, Star Wars, gotta go. And I was like, my mom was sitting there and I was like, sorry, Mom, we gotta watch Jin. Hold on. So I changed the TV.
Oh, you paused the Acolyte?
I did.
Wow.
I paused it
with
8
your
minutes
mom.
in.
Your
With
mom
my
was
mom
like,
there.
wow, I'm really jamming to this Acolyte. And you're like, pause.
No, right.
It's done.
She was a little confused about why I was freaking out. And I was like, no, Mom, Jin's home from the military. And she's like, that's Jin right now. And I'm like, that's Jin right now. And she's like, what is he saying? And I was like, let's turn on the auto translations, or the live translations rather. So we had the live translations on. It was really lovely. When we watched that for about 30 minutes, she was folding laundry. Okay. She wasn't willingly sitting down and being like, Sarah, let me engage in your hobbies. Anyway, it's a separate thing. And then I went back to the Acolyte and I finished the Acolyte on Tuesday. And then I rewatched it again on Wednesday in full and then wrote my 5 pages of notes. I enjoyed it on the first time. But boy, was between Jin coming home and doing the live and watching that episode, wow, the emotional whiplash. Also, I had a great Domino's pizza. So shout out to Domino's.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored. Sponsor me, Domino's, please. That'd be great. I like pizza.
Speaking of Destiny, I came out of my Destiny Tuesday night extravaganza that has been dominating my life for the past week to watch a different Destiny of the Acolyte.
Wow.
Really full circle moment for me. Anyways.
Shout out.
I know.
I also have to say, guys, listeners, Brad says he can't record on Tuesdays because he's playing Destiny. It's very serious for him. So this was a serious thing that he left one Destiny to go watch another Destiny,
I have played 80 hours of Destiny in the last 7 days. 7 to 8 days.
Think about that, fam. Think about that, fam. And how did it go? So the people can know.
Great. It was fantastic. But we're not here to discuss Destiny. We're here to discuss drumroll Destiny. Yes. So let's dive into it. Sarah.
Yeah.
What did you think of this episode? Because I feel like this was a turning point for the series. I feel like it was a turning point for Star Wars in many ways in terms of taking risks, being bold, doing things we haven't seen before in live action. The matriarchy is strong in Star Wars. We love to see it. Good episode overall. A lot of really successful things going for it.
Yeah. Patriarchy bad, matriarchy woo.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Space witches. More like space awesome.
Happy
people.
Pride Month, babes.
Yeah.
Gay space witches.
Hell yeah. What a gift for Pride Month. Star Wars was feeding us.
Star Wars said, how can we appeal to the people? And the answer was lesbian space witches. And
Yeah.
I, for one, as the people, was delighted, seen, heard, just taken care of. You know, they really thought about me. And I appreciate that.
Some terrible people on the internet will say, ooh, lesbian space witches and Star Wars ruined. And I'll be like, wait, lesbian space witches? I'm in.
Exactly.
What is bad about that?
Right. You know, if they're like, oh, if that ruins your Star Wars, then
I feel sorry for you.
Go find something else.
Yeah. Maybe the franchise isn't for you, bro, as Freddie Prinze Jr. would say.
Right. Never change that Freddie Prinze Jr. The one rant, iconic. But yeah, no, this episode was really interesting, and it gave us so much that I know is going to be rewritten again in later episodes from different points of view and give us more of the story, because this certainly wasn't it. In terms of the full picture. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where that takes us in the future. But the baseline that we have now is crazy interesting and meaty.
You make an excellent point there. And I haven't been too plugged into the discourse, luckily. Like, my timeline has been pretty good.
My timeline is so good.
Which is
everybody's talking about the discourse, and I'm like, where is it? But I also have like literally 125,000 accounts blocked. So
same. But most of the time it's stuff getting like quote tweeted on my timeline. But like, it seems like there is like kind of like a we don't know everything. It's like, yeah, it's a murder mystery show in Star Wars, and it's all about unreliable narrators. And there's a very specific point at the end of this episode where certain things are omitted, certain things are gone through at a much quicker pace and a little bit of a fractured pace in some sense. Like, oh, how did they get there so quick? And how did he get there so quick? And what is happening? And why is she acting different? And so, and we'll talk about that a little bit, like the Rashomon effect. We know that was going to be a way that the story was told, according to Leslie Headland. It's a way that we've seen a story told in The Last Jedi. And I think taking different points of view and different lived experiences based on that point of view and how you interpret events happening around you, I think is fascinating. I think it's something that Star Wars has like needed a little bit of another breath of fresh air with, because Ryan did it so successfully with like Luke and Ben Solo. And it's really fun to see that now being played with between Osha and May and the Jedi, and like, what are all of their points of view on this night on Brendok. So yeah, Brendok, 16 years ago, that's where we start the episode. How did you feel that we were getting like an entire episode with a flashback? I know we didn't get Yord this week, which, you know,
yeah,
I miss you, Yord. Next week, salute emoji. We'll see you.
No, oh my Yord today, except for maybe that one tweet that Star Wars posted earlier today. We're recording this on Thursday, of Charlie Barnett talking about the Yord Horde, and then also getting Yord puns. So maybe that's our oh my Yord today. Okay. But
yeah, we can't start a segment and then the next week be like, guys, sorry, we don't have a Yord Horde, like a oh my Yord moment. Like, that's really embarrassing. That's like letting it flop. We're letting it flop, and we're not going to let it flop. So yeah, that's our oh my Yord moment. Which, like, how do we get stickers? Star Wars Swagman?
I think Swagman should like start like a single Redbubble shop and just have that sticker available in the Redbubble shop for like $1.25 or $3.25, whatever. I don't know. Stickers go for a lot these days. And like, I'll buy 10.
Yeah. All proceeds go to Yords of America. Help a Yord in need.
He's got to get that good steaming equipment, you know, like a good steamer.
If he's not steaming his clothes, he's going to be very, very sad. And we don't want a sad Yord.
And wrinkly.
Yeah, we don't wrinkle Jedi robes in this house. But yeah, we start this episode with Osha and May, and I was very happy to see these child actors getting an entire episode for themselves.
Yeah.
Very fun, because we only saw them in the flashbacks. But really like love the planet of Brendok. It's like very serene, very full of life. I think like starting with this like Bunta tree in the beginning, which we know is like the Bunta poison that May uses against Torben, which there's some poetic rhyme with that. It's interesting how we start with the episode with Osha's the one that ran off. May finds her, and they both are sort of toying with this creature. I think May is doing it in a way that is a little bit more aggressive and violent and trying to like control this butterfly creature and harm it in a way. But a little bit foreboding, obviously, of like the events to come later in the episode. But you and I last week, we didn't dive too much into the flashbacks or the dream sequence that Osha has on the ship. But we get that line once again at the beginning of this episode. You're with me, I'm with you, always one, but born as two. As above sits the stars and below lies the same. I give you you and you give me me. And so I want to take a moment to like dissect that, because that's like what really sets the episode. And a lot of this episode is about identity, who Osha wants to be versus who May wants to be, etc. So like, what are your thoughts there on that phrase?
Right. So I, like you, sat there and wrote this whole thing down because I needed to have it. And it's so interesting because it clearly does a couple of things. It kind of establishes the thread, right? I feel like when we first heard this in the first episode, I immediately thought, oh, like red string of fate. Like these people are tied together in their fate. And that's essentially what we're getting at here, in the sense that the Force, as it's called by this coven of witches, is called the thread. And that this chant, I guess, connects them to each other, connects them as like, one being or two halves of a whole. It connects them with the environment around them, the stars and the sea. And so it gives them a responsibility to each other in this. And I thought it was so curious, because we'll later talk about like the power of the one, power of two, power of many, and the power of many kind of being the ideal. But here we have two being reduced down to one, and that being powerful and important in itself. I don't know what my thoughts are on this yet. I think it's just really interesting, and I just want to put a pin in it and go, let's think about that one.
Yeah, my mind sticks on the always one, but born as two.
Yes.
And I try to wrap my head around that, because I think when we hear the word two a lot in Star Wars, like the rule of two, master, apprentice, Sith, and the show being about dark, mysterious forces at play in the galaxy behind the scenes. So like that obviously jumps out to me. But I think noteworthy in the opening is how Osha doesn't initially reply with the rest of the phrase, because I think throughout this entire episode, she is really being pulled in a completely different direction. Like she doesn't want to be a witch. She's wondering what's out there beyond Brendok. She wants to be her own self and not share everything with May. And she also feels like the only reason they are so similar is because there are no other children. And that's also noteworthy too. They're the only two children of this coven. And, we'll talk a little bit about that and the miracle behind it. But I think it makes Osha's life a bit complicated in many ways, whereas May wants to be confined to those walls that they're told not to venture outside of.
Right. I think that the children point, being the only children, is such a key thing for these two characters, because Osha she's just so curious. She's got a sense of wonder, which is very childlike and which is very characteristic for a child. But May has a sense of comfort in where she is. She's not curious because she's comfortable. And so I just find that difference between them really interesting.
This is where we meet Mother Coral, who is Zabrak, and I believe the other mom, along with Anicia, right? Because she's the one who actually carries the children. And she's awesome. I love her. She's so interesting. It's been a while since we've seen a Zabrak on screen, right? I believe, like live action.
I don't know for certain.
It's been a hot minute since, at least I guess since Solo, when Darth Maul made a brief appearance at the end of Solo. Has there not been
any Zabrak in a TV show?
I don't think so. I don't think there were any in Ahsoka. I don't think there were any in Mando, Book of Boba Fett.
If we're wrong, listener, please tweet us the Zabraks from the other shows, because they're very cool. And also, Mother Coral has pointy ears. Shout out to the pointy ears.
But really cool. I loved her makeup. I love that she was stylized different, like more so in line with what we've seen, maybe with the Night Sisters in a way. So I thought that was fascinating. And she seems like she, throughout the episode, is like much harsher on Osha, and Osha attaining a certain threshold of ability and tapping into her potential. You know, I think there's one moment in the training session where Anastasia pushes back on the kids, and May is the one to like use the force and push back against that. And then Osha is kind of cowering behind her, and she says like, you know, Osha, I expect more out of you, right? So she seems like kind of the sterner parent of the two in some ways, whereas Mother Anastasia is like, oh, sweet treats for my sweet children, like you all deserve, you know, spice cream. And she's kind of, I think Anastasia is living a little bit of a life of not trying to worry too much of the outside threat, whereas Coral is like really locked in and almost to the point of paranoia with like the Jedi and what it means if Osha keeps running away for their coven.
Right. Mother Coral definitely seems to be a leader, like a second in command. Like she's definitely like a romantic interest to Anastasia, but also seems to be a second in command for the coven in the sense that she is very concerned with protection. Whereas Anastasia, while she is also concerned with protection, she really is thinking about nurturing. And honestly, those sorts of pairings can do pretty decently because you have somebody who's looking in one, looking in out for one thing that might be a weakness for the other person and vice versa. But it also makes them butt heads a little bit on what they think is right, as we see in this episode. And the thing is, like, neither of them are capital W wrong. They both have solid, valuable points of view on the raising of them and how they should be cared for and what caring looks like. So they're an interesting couple. I like them.
Yeah, the butting heads is really interesting later when Anisia's like, no violence. I'm going to keep calling her Anisia. I know it's Anastasia. I'm going to have to.
Yeah, that's my fault. Because I was like, Anisia.
Trying to undo that one in my mind. Anastasia like says no violence, whereas Coral is like, what's for Jedi? You know, what's the blood of for Jedi amongst their giant order? Like, who's going to notice if they're gone? And so those two really clash later on. But I think we should start with going back to that training sequence. Really fascinating part of the episode with the Force being referred to as the thread. And I know this is something you love particularly. So like when I watched this episode, I was like, oh, Sarah's going to be devouring this one. Like it's just the way that different societies and peoples call the Force, what they refer to it as, and also the way that we feel the Force and see it is something we explore a lot in the High Republic.
Right. I think that the thread is really interesting because it is nothing new in the sense that we have thought about how the Force ties people together, specifically as sequel trilogy fans, as Reylos. Like, we have always thought there's a push and pull, like a thread between Rey and Kylo. And their story is intertwined throughout the sequel trilogy in that way. And so this idea and the way that it's presented is not new, but it being presented as its own freestanding idea is really interesting. And I don't know if you noticed this when you were watching the episode, but one, you can generally see you can actually see the Force and what she's pulling throughout kind of this training sequence. Not all the time, but I found that like you could see it like as if it were airbending in Avatar. Maybe I'm going crazy because now I'm watching it on a smaller screen and I'm seeing it as well, but I swear to God, there's like an actual visual effect component as she's, like holding the thread, right? Okay. Thank you. If this is Sarah sounding crazy and nobody else saw this on their TV, then I don't know. But
well, no, I think you're onto something because the way that she places her hands, like make it look like she's almost playing an instrument.
Right.
And like pulling the strings on an instrument and manipulating the sound and the noise.
Pulling on it. Yeah. But also, like, I think it looks like there's, I swear to God, there looks like there is like a small tornado between her hands occasionally. Okay. Not in all the close up shots, but like, anyway.
Yeah, I think there is one during the ascension ceremony. Like she kind of pulls the light from the sky almost, and it's like in her hands. I think that's what you might be thinking of.
No, it's not. But it also kind of like, it's the air around her, but it also kind of has that vibe. And then it has like a purple hue, which is like the hue of their coven. Oh yeah. Okay. Now I'm looking at it now. When she is kind of doing this ceremony to May and giving her the markings, it has a purple hue and you can visually see it. And I think that is really noticeable and like really notable. And the same thing in the way you can kind of see it in the training sequence. Because we don't always see the Force. However, don't we see it? Now, I'm not, Michelle, I love you. Don't come at me. I'm not a witches expert. So if I'm saying dumb things, forgive me. Don't we see like the Night Sisters' power visually as well?
Yeah, like even with Marin, the dark magic, the green flame is often what visualizes their Force power.
Thank you. So I think it's very interesting. And I don't know if I have any like actual thoughts about this, but very interesting to me that we can visually see the Force power of witches. And that for this coven, it manifests itself as purple, which is obviously based on the clothing that we see in May's a young adult costume, as well as the costumes throughout this episode in the younger years, that they focus a lot on purple and also these other like jewelry tones like red, green, blue, these rich tones, and then these beautiful patterns and like heavy fabrics. I'm not somebody who's well versed in costuming, but I thought that was really notable and interesting. There's like this draping going on. Anyway.
Yeah, no, the costumes were on point. I feel like every time Jodie Turner-Smith walked into a room, I was like, what is she wearing? Oh my God, stunning. Absolutely stunning. Like, so good.
She looks incredible, and I have to hand it to everybody who designed these costumes and who did the hair and who sewed these costumes, because these fabrics are stunning.
They're really good. And she does an incredible job in this episode as well. Like, there are several moments throughout this where I'm like, oh my God, we're so lucky to have her in the series, like performing the role that she is. And you know, you and I talk a lot about how there's a great absence of mothers in Star Wars. And although we end up with yet another dead mother in Star Wars in this episode,
well, two dead mothers or a whole lot of dead mothers.
Yeah.
In this coven,
I was very happy to like see her be this leader and have this, again, like this matriarchy that we often don't see in Star Wars. It's often the patriarchy. And I think that was just like a nice little a spin and like a nice little way to see. I think it was just great to see like a different part of the galaxy in a different way that people are living on this planet, right? And what the Jedi claim is an uninhabited planet is actually one that is rife with culture and traditions, you know. But thinking of the thread, right? So the thread is not a power. Oh, go ahead.
Can I stop you before we go back to the thread and just talk a little bit about what you said there at the end, which was like the Jedi think this planet is uninhabited, but there's actually a lot of rich culture here. I would love to just touch on like the history of the Coven and also the Jedi and the Republic and culture for a little second before we go back to the Force. Okay. Because we learn through Anastaea's point of view that the Coven was exiled, and that in this exile they were forced into hiding, hunted, and persecuted because some people consider their power to be dark and unnatural. Now, dark and unnatural, these are not words that we have not heard before with regards to the Sith or the dark side or creating life, etc., etc., etc. So I think that's particularly notable, but I think we can get back to that in a second. They're not necessarily here, or at least according to Anastaea, who is of course somebody who is the leader of, you know, this coven by choice. Nor are they accepted by the outside world. So they've clearly built up something that was very fortified and good enough for them, and like allows them to continue their life in a way that it's private and secluded. But also I find myself wondering, because we know this is from Osha's point of view, and we also know that she clearly is like fond of Anastasia throughout this episode, and then maybe I'll get to that a little bit later, which I think is interesting, kind of a couple of things that Anastasia does. But I wonder if we are to trust about them being exiled. And I don't mean to like distrust Anastasia, but also I kind of go into this episode a little bit with like the question everything motive. I don't know. Like that's something I'm really looking forward to, like hopefully hearing more about. We might not, but hopefully hearing more about as the season goes on. More history of the coven. What else was I going to talk about? History of the coven. The Jedi saying that this planet was uninhabited, right?
Mm-hmm.
This makes me think of the High Republic, which we are in this point in time, but like the High Republic, all of the books, and specifically phase 1, Lena So's great works. She's wanting to reach out to more places that are not included in the Republic. And we know that Brendok is not a Republic planet, according to Anastasia. And so she puts out these great works and she tries to bring different planets into the Republic, which, at least for some readers and probably some of the planets as well, I don't remember all the points of view if we got any of that, were a little bit hesitant to accept their agreement because they're like, well, they're placing their way of life on us. And they're going to make us do things more the Republic's way than our way. And we're going to lose our identity in this. But also there's a certain, I don't want to say elitism because that might be slightly too harsh of a word, but like a sort of elitism or strong feeling about the reputation of the Republic and the validity of the Republic, and seeing non-Republic worlds as lesser or as not yet sort of worlds, like how we categorize in on our Earth, like third world countries versus first world countries. Like there's like an economic element to that, is why we kind of categorize these things this way. But also in doing that, we are making an assumption that you must go from step 1 to step 3, or other way around in the sense. You must work your way up to be like these top countries, when there's also a lot of flaws to the way that the top economic countries are run.
Yeah, well, I think this all ties back to like thinking to our trailer discussion a few months ago and some of the interviews that Leslie was giving, like going back to that idea of she sees the dynamics as underdog versus institution or institutional threat. And I think when we talk about the exile of the coven and the fact that, Anastasia is saying things like, there's no place in the galaxy for people like us. They don't welcome us. Like witches are not accepted into the galaxy at large. That's important to think about in the way that the Jedi institute their beliefs and how they carry themselves. And Leslie Headland says, the Jedi are a benevolent, well-intentioned institution, but they are an institution and they have amassed all the power. Mm-hmm. It's like, what are the cracks in that? Like, what does that kind of amassing of power at the top where the Jedi reside, literally in the top of a tower on Coruscant, looking out upon everybody.
Right.
What does that lead to? And I think in this instance, you see that I don't know if like rivalry is the right word, but that like tension between these two groups as soon as the Jedi walk through those doors, right? It's like, why are you here? You come with weapons and unannounced, but you say you're not a threat. It's like, how do those two things really line up with what you're telling me? And also like the one comment that Anastasia makes about, the all-knowing Jedi were ignorant of their surroundings. I find that hard to believe. Like that delivery, she ate that line. That was amazing. Mm-hmm. I was like, damn, yeah, that's some good stuff. But I think there's something to be said about, there's an offhand comment about the law of the Republic, and what it states, and we don't get the actual law itself. But I think we're left to infer that the law, and let me know if you think this is the correct one too, the law states that only Jedi are allowed to train Force-sensitive children. There is an edict given by the Republic that if you are a Force-sensitive child outside in the galaxy somewhere, the Jedi have a right, a legislated right to come test your abilities, and give you the choice of being a Jedi. Although, is it much of a choice when you're 4 years old?
Right. Okay. Yeah. They come in and they say, we are concerned that you are training children. Concerned? Why are we concerned? They're out here minding their own business. Why are we concerned? Okay. Why are we concerned? Republic law states, and then she goes, we are not a part of, Brendok is not a part of the Republic. Your Republic law, like, why does your Republic law apply here? Let's, the Jedi having some sort of mandate over Force-sensitive children really is interesting to me. And also this, dare I say lore, everybody's favorite / least favorite word. Dare I say lore about how young children find their way into the order. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall from Tales of the Jedi that like Ahsoka's mom called the Jedi when she was like 1 years old.
Mm-hmm.
We find out that Master Soul entered the Jedi after being tested when he was 4 years old, and Osha and May are 8. It's just interesting to me that they ask a 4-year-old, hey, do you want to be a Jedi? And this 4-year-old has enough sense to be like, yeah, I'm super different than everyone around me, and I would like to leave my parents forever. It's interesting. Like, I don't necessarily have any like opinions on it that are like, oh, Soul didn't know what he was talking about or whatever, but I find the testing and the asking to be interesting when it does really make me question if there is much choice, considering the Jedi are, it's either like, yes, you get to go learn and be a Jedi, or you just be a nobody on your home planet. There's no in between. You either learn the Force through Jedi, this Church of the Force situation, right? Like they are religious order, or you don't learn the Force at all. Good luck.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the Jedi are presented in this episode. And I agree, like they are a well-intentioned institution, but intention again versus impact, it's to a point of religious indoctrination, right? It's this coven is practicing the Force in a way that we don't agree with. So we're going to go out to that coven, make sure they're not training children in ways that we don't agree with. And if there are children there, we're going to give them the option to come learn the Force the right way. Or at least what we dictate is the right way. You know, and to Anastaea's point, this isn't about power, this isn't about good or bad. This is about power and who's allowed to use it. The Jedi think that they're the only ones who are allowed to use that power in the name of peace. And that's what Kymir says in episode 2. And so I think from Anastaea's point of view, and to going back to the idea of the thread is not a power you yield. Pull the thread, change everything. It ties you to your destiny. It binds you to others. So it's like this idea that the thread is not something that should be held to one institution or one group. Anybody can pull that thread and choose their own destiny. And that's why the episode's called Destiny. But the Jedi will tell you, no, you do as the Force wills it. You don't pull that thread. The Force pulls that thread for you, and you feel that through the Force. You don't pull.
That is the will of the Force versus you can make a choice and not manipulate the Force, but harness the Force in a new way that changes the thread. It's a passive versus an active understanding of what the Force could be. And I think that the Jedi see the activity of the Force, like the active version of the Force, and say, oh, that's threatening. That's unnatural. It's so interesting because like the path of the open hand and the Jedi are much closer on the scale of should we use the Force or how should we use the Force or not than the path of the open hand and this coven. in the sense that the path of the open hand says the Force is freely given, and therefore we do not use it. We allow it to exist, and we do not use it because using it creates bad consequences. The Jedi said, it is the will of the Force. The Force has set something, prophecies. The Force has set something in motion, and we follow the will of the Force. And then they think that Darksiders are going, well, you're using the Force for unnatural powers because you're using it for yourself at all. And that's kind of like where the coven sits, which is not, to me, necessarily dark side. I think it really has to do with intention rather than the action itself. A lot of the time. But like they sit farther along on the scale. And so I just think that is interesting that the idea that like, okay, so like your life, you aren't a passive actor in your life. Act on things and the Force will respond. You are currently weaving the tapestry of the threads, as opposed to it already being woven and you're just traveling the path of the stitches.
Thinking back to the line of this isn't about good or bad, and Leslie's quote that she gave to StarWars.com a while back about how this show focuses beyond that simplistic black and white view of good versus evil, right? It's that like moral gray area in between. And I think your point about intention, like let's focus on that and let's focus on the big revelation of this episode, which is Osha and May were created using the Force. They were a virgin birth, for lack of a better word.
So we understand it so far.
Yes. As we're told to believe by Anastasia, right? I have no reason to necessarily not believe her in the way that the twins were created, because there is a precedent for it in Star Wars, right? But I think it's important, if one might bring up here, if this is the right time to, and I'm sure this might not be the last time we talk about this gentleman, this highly esteemed gentleman. Have you heard of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, Sarah?
Literally never in my life.
It's fascinating because, like,
you're not going to tell it to me?
No, it's not a story the Jedi would tell you. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Not allowed.
Okay. Well, I guess I will be not in the know.
Yeah. If you want to know more, you have to go to the squid play on Coruscant.
The Mon Calamari. You're going to call the Mon Calamari squid in front of my salad?
The squid play.
It's an opera.
Squid opera.
It's a Mon Calamari opera.
All right, fine. Duh.
Get it right. If it's not a Mon Calamari opera and I've just like so confidently said something that's like wrong, don't come after me, please.
But what made my gears start churning a little bit was that speech she's giving during the ceremony, which, by the way, that whole ceremony with the vocalizing of the witches and God, like the ascension in their voice and the way that they sing. And we're getting a song tomorrow, apparently, called like
tomorrow?
The Power of One, The Power of Two. Yeah. There's a song coming out from Victoria.
Well, I mean,
Monet.
I had heard about it, but like I didn't know it was tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's tomorrow or sometime this week. But I think it is tomorrow because music on Fridays.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
It might be out by the time you hear this, listener.
True. Probably is.
Yeah.
But what really got me thinking about Plagueis was Anastasia talking about how their power was considered dark and unnatural. And of course, my mind goes to Palpatine's comment to Anakin, the dark side is a pathway that many to abilities that many consider to be unnatural, and you hear that word unnatural and your mind can't, you make the connection. You can't avoid it. And so thinking about Plagueis as somebody who influenced midichlorians to create life, and I know the Plagueis novel is no longer official Star Wars canon, but the point of that book was that Plagueis and Palpatine were experimenting with creating life, and as a result, the Force balanced itself with the birth of Anakin. It was the Force reacting to those experiments. And so you think of the intention of somebody like Plagueis, who he was doing those experiments to extend his own life. That's something that the Sith crave. They want immortality. They want to live as long as possible and control and have power. And that's a selfish desire, right? It's selfishness at its core to want immortality, right?
Right.
on the other side of the equation, when you look at this coven, like they're using the quote unquote dark side of the force, again, like intention here, to create life and continue the legacy of their coven, right? That's the words that Anastasia asks both the kids is, you know, upon my death, you vow to protect our secrets of our coven and continue our legacy, right? That's what it's about. It's not about the immortality of Anastasia and her extending her life. It's about like growing beyond through the kids she brought into this world through her act of creation, right? It's an act of creation that is, again, considered unnatural by the Jedi, most likely, but one with good intent.
And the intent being that her people don't die out and that their memory and their culture and their legacy doesn't die out. And like that's the really, really interesting thing to me, which is like, I've been thinking so much about attention when it comes to the Force because the Jedi see the Darksiders as manipulating the Force. But what if the Force is meant to be used and tugged on and manipulated? Like, what if it is meant to be wielded in certain ways? The Jedi certainly wield the Force when they fight. And so it's really interesting to me. I'm trying to like distance myself from the Jedi's understanding of the Force as the good point of the Force and attempting to find something a little bit more neutral in when I think about this, because we know that their color is purple being, you know, mix of red and blue, color being, I'm now saying color instead of purple. Purple being this very powerful royal color, and being something that is considered in the middle of what we know to be good and bad. And so I find that to be really interesting, especially as we hear both about using the Force is unnatural, but also the Ascension is about walking through fear. It is about sacrificing a part of yourself. That's something that Anastasia says. But there's also this quote from The Rise of Skywalker that has me thinking every once in a while. And it's Luke's confronting fear is the destiny of the Jedi. Ooh. Right? And so now we're getting things that are associated with the Jedi. Fear, walking through fear, confronting fear, understanding feir. Let's think about the High Republic. What do the Jedi fear?
The founding question, right?
Right. I don't want to give spoilers about the most recently released book, but Temptation of the Force. But wow, do I have some things to say about fear in that book? But I don't, like we know that fear leads to the dark side, right? But they're not saying that we are fearing. We're walking through fear. We're working through fear. We're acknowledging fear and moving forward. That's not necessarily dark side to me. That feels a lot closer to what the Jedi are saying. So it's really interesting how the structure of this coven and how the teachings of this coven really do, straddle what we already know of the dark and the light. And I think it's so great that like Leslie Headland and all these writers are like, let's make everything that we see in the show something we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is nothing in here is new. And I say that with like a lot of compliments because, the twins aren't new. The Force isn't new. Understandings of the Force isn't new. Witches aren't new. Separated twins aren't new. Dead Jedi aren't new. But they're being presented to us in ways that make us question what we know, make us think about the stories that we know and compare them to me in a way that's really compelling. Anyway. Off the soapbox. Sarah, you're just monologuing at this point. You're not making any points.
No, points were made, but like very, very good points. They had to be said. But
you also monologued for a while, Sarah.
No, but I'm sitting here sipping my tea, enjoying every moment of it. But I your comment about intention really got me thinking a lot. And yeah, like stop thinking in the binary. It's not dark side. It's not light side. It's how you use the power. And it's what you use the power for. That's important.
Right. Like force choking somebody with the intention to harm is a dark side power.
Bad. Right.
Right. Like force choking because you want to harm somebody. I don't know if there's really a good reason to force choke anything, but like the point being the intention behind the force choking
maybe
is harming.
like force choke Heimlich maneuver. Like you're not
Well,
choking, but you're like trying to
force-
unchoke.
Force Heimlich maneuver would be different than like force choking.
Right. Okay.
But like also, I mean, like I guess the good thing is like, I mean, like if you're into that, but like that's not this conversation, you know?
Anyways, continue.
Brad can choose to cut that out or not.
It was pretty good. Pretty good content.
Thank you so much.
I'll let the listeners decide.
Right. But like there's not really a good reason in the Star Wars galaxy for force choking. Therefore, that is considered a dark side. Brad is just like, Sarah, what are you going on about at this point? Sarah, stop talking. In this, so that is a dark side power. Forced lightning with the intent. It's like, yeah, I think intention plays a role because you can manipulate the force and still seek good in the force. I think, or still seek good intentions.
Yeah, like your power is out and you're force lightninging some stakes.
You know what?
Intention.
I didn't realize that there was a good reason for force lightninging, but that might be it, actually.
Gotta cook some food for dinner.
To grill.
Fires out, grill. Count Dooku makes a mean steak.
You think so?
Yeah, like a ribeye.
Would he like invite you to the cookout? Like, would he invite you to the gathering? Like what's the vibes of that event? Because like I just feel like it'd be a little cold. Like I feel like
the event is like you show up and there's a bunch of cold steak on the table and then he force lightnings the entire table and everybody's steak gets cooked immediately and he's like, aha.
But it's not like, oh, who's on the aux? Let's play some bangers. I've got a cooler with drinks over there. Let's have a good time. Like I don't feel like that's the gathering that Dooku is gonna give me if he invites me.
That's the part of Attack of the Clones you didn't see was the steak scene. We saw the pear scene on Naboo. We did not see the steak scene where Count Dooku's floating a little piece of steak into Wat Tambor's mouth. We didn't see that. That's the deleted scene Lucasfilm doesn't want you to see. But no, like going back.
Hard at that was
going back. Okay. In all seriousness, though, I think going back again to. So the Coven used the Force to create life. It was a miracle. Their people were on the brink of extinction, right? This is the first time.
Who did she ally herself with in order to create that life? I mean, I'm talking about intention a lot, but I have some questions.
Their people were on the brink of extinction. They haven't performed the ascension ceremonies since they were exiled. The first time since that point, right? And so you understand the motivation there to do what they did, for Anastasia to do what she did. But to Quarrel's point, what happens when the Jedi find out how you created them? The Jedi are going to say, no, that's not how you do it. But it's interesting because they take in Anakin Skywalker knowing he was, again, like a virgin birth, quote unquote, without a father. He's the chosen one. So the Jedi will gladly take in the chosen one to be a weapon for the Jedi. But when they learn about Osha and May and how they were born by a coven of witches, no, not allowed. And so it's interesting. It's like, who are the Jedi to have that right to say how the Force can be used, how those threads can be pulled? And again, it goes back to that amassing of power by an institution. And, I think there's some very obvious parallels here between like IVF birth and like, reproductive rights and the way that some institutions are gonna, in our country, have overturned bodily autonomy and want to control the ways in which we have a say in our bodies. And it's kind of the same thing here. It's like the Jedi are trying to have a say in how you can and can't have a kid and create life with the Force. And I think there's some like really interesting parallels there that I won't get into now, but like, I don't know. I think there's some lines that could be drawn there.
I don't think you're wrong in that. I think there's like a sense of like, and that conversation is really prevalent in our society right now between the government, between states, between religious institutions, and it's one where there's a lot of like factors at play, right? Like, of course, the intention of life is good, and wouldn't we want to bring life into the world? And isn't that a goal of humanness? And like, and I say that societally, like within the zeitgeist, there's like you go to school, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have children, you have grandchildren, you die, like, and then you're loved and remembered by your loved ones. And so there's this like natural path that like, okay, you have kids, right? But what does it mean when your body can't do that as easily or as, quote unquote, naturally as other people? Are you therefore less of a person? Are you therefore not entitled to have kids? Like, that's a really complicated conversation, but it definitely does carry over into this conversation that the coven is having. We have no kids. How are we going to carry on our legacy, our memories, our worth? How can we continue on if we don't have people? And so I think that is a very interesting connection, and I'm not an expert and so in IVF, so that's not the conversation to have here. But
right, yeah, not my place to speak on it either.
No,
because I was like, it was something I was thinking of, but not something I quite have the expertise to dive into beyond that kind of surface level parallel or connection.
Even though Brad and I just talked about it for like 3 minutes total, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
But I want to go back to your question about like, who did Anastasia learn the power from? But also,
Brad tweeted earlier today, is Sarah going to kick me off the pod if I talk about Plagueis or whatever?
But like also at the same time, who are we to say that she learned the power from anybody? Did Plagueis learn the power from the witches? Like who came first, the chicken or the egg?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
But I know we had some like fun speculation going on of like maybe Anastasia and her people became desperate and they turned to the Sith, or they turned to dark side users, and they learned this power and they used this power.
Right.
And maybe that Sith was a man named Plagueis. Maybe he was,
or a Tooth Fairy.
Or Tooth Fairy, right.
I think Tooth Fairy's too young, but
right.
Tooth Fairy.
We're of the mindset that Tooth Fairy is sort of an appendage of the larger Plagueis Sith uprising that is currently happening behind the scenes. We know we're leading there eventually. We know that Palpatine is going to get trained in the next however many years. So, he's out there.
That's
somewhere.
Something I actually go back and forth on, which is the rule of two. The learner has to kill the master. There can only be two, but this is an acolyte. Is this acolyte the learner of the master, or is it, or is she rather, like, this is a person that we're actually talking about, May in this case, we assume, or is this acolyte the learner of the learner? Does the learner need a learner so that when the Tooth Fairy in this case would overtake the master, he would have a learner?
Or is it a Count Dooku situation where Palpatine used Count Dooku just for Anakin? To groom Anakin.
Right.
Is let's just call him Plagueis. Let's just say that. Let's say it's Plagueis and Tooth Fairy is his apprentice. Is he really just using Tooth Fairy to groom May? And that also begs the question of, are there third parties at Force that neither the Jedi or the Coven are aware of on the night on Brendok? And we'll get into what happens. I know we're like almost an hour into this podcast and we haven't gotten to the explosive meat and potatoes, as I'll call them. Microwave is spinning around, potatoes are flying everywhere inside, spraying everywhere.
You might have put it on for 4 minutes instead of 40 seconds. Oops.
Yeah. Oopsies. Oopsie. But I think there's some maybe larger forces at play that we're not aware of, that and nobody there is aware of, and that's sowing into the chaos and confusion and the uncertainty around that night. And maybe it's an instance, we speculated, maybe if Anastasia consulted a Sith on how to use this power, maybe that Sith got a little bit interested about, oh, okay.
Ooh. Right.
Maybe I want that kid that you're going to create from the dark side. Yeah.
Let me pull in that thread, because, I was saying that I was like, I don't want to discount Anastasia saying that they were exiled, hunted, persecuted, and forced into hiding. But I also do feel like this episode asks me to question everything. What if the reason why the coven is there is because she allied herself with someone else to create this life, and this life was going to be very powerful and very important. And oh my goodness, just kidding, there are 2 of them. Maybe we only intended to have 1 heir to this coven, but oh, we have 2. And now that's a whole separate situation. And now this Sith, this bad person, this dark side user wants them back, wants one of them back, wants both of them back, right? And so she has to go into hiding because she has chosen to create life with the intention of keeping the coven alive. And the person she has allied herself with is not okay with playing by the rules that they had set up. You know, and so she has to hide in order to ensure that they can live on at all. The kids can live on at all.
Right. It's not just don't go beyond the city walls to hide from the Jedi. It's to hide from forces that might want to come back and take you.
Right.
Who have an interest in your development.
And that's kind of my other thought. And again, I don't want to doubt Anastasia because I think her quote about like the galaxy is not a place that welcomes women like us is like really valuable on the face value and the meta commentary and what it could mean within the context of the statement. Like I don't necessarily think that like her allying herself with the dark side user in order to create life, if that were the case, would negate that statement. But I just like do want to say that is a really, I think, valuable and important quote in this episode as well. So I want to keep that in the back of my mind as I'm making these speculations.
Yeah, and I also, you got me thinking there about the twins and like, oh, there's 2 of them. Maybe originally it was supposed to be 1. You know, always 1 before there are 2 or whatever, right? And maybe that was, you know, kind of similar to Legends saying that Anakin was the Force reacting to Plagueis's use and manipulation of the Force to create life. Maybe the birth of Osha was the birth of twins was to balance that out because they were trying to create life using what is, you know, called a dark side power essentially, or like the, you know, the ability to manipulate life. And so the Force reacted and gave 2 twins, one of light and one of dark. And I think of, you know, the O in Acolyte, you know, kind of that. Well, also the O, like the moon in this episode too. I think there's some cool imagery there.
The moons in this episode with one being reddish, a reddish kind of hue or aura around it, and one having a blue aura around it, and also like delicious. That being reflected in what I believe to be like rings of the O. To me, I associate that with like literal rings, but of O and Acolyte, which kind of have a blue and a red thing to them. But I also think there might have only intended to be 1 because if you look at Anastasia's markings, we can call them tattoos, markings, whatever. They're centered in her forehead and come down the center of her face. And then when May receives them, they are on the left side of her forehead, which is the side that is closer to Osha in the ceremony. So I'm assuming that Osha's would have been on the right side of her forehead. And then if they stood next to each other, they would be, you know, they would be looking at each other, essentially, the markings. So it makes me wonder if there's an intentionality between the centering of the markings with Anastasia and the fact that they are split and on the sides, meaning that is not exactly how it's supposed to be, because there's a certain quote unquote rightness in the symmetry.
One's on one side of the Force, one's on the other side of the Force.
Well, some say,
you know,
what the thread has tied together, no one can separate.
Can we get some matching face tattoos at Star Wars Celebration Tokyo?
No.
Okay, so no May and Asaya circle pattern.
Yeah, I actually want to quit the pod. So
okay. Noted.
Right. So you want to keep doing the pod, I want to quit the pod. And then there's going to be this third party who's like the god of all podcasts. And I'm going to be like, I want to go with that guy. He's really interesting.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Boy.
I'll stop talking.
Do we have anything else to say on this topic? I feel like this will be something we learn more about potentially, because I do think, I do think there is some quote unquote dark side tied into the creation of these 2 kids. I think
I
there
think it's
there is
possible.
something very obvious there happening.
Marcion Rowe had children, and then Anastasia contacted the Nile. kidding. No, one thing I would like to say before we go on is Indara knows that it's May and not Osha when they are fighting. Due to the markings, she like shakes her hair and it reveals her forehead, and we see her markings. And she says, not, I thought you were dead, or X, Y, and Z. She says, what are you doing here? I think that's the quote. And so immediately she knows that it is not Osha. And I just want to put that in the back of our heads as we continue forward here.
Also noteworthy with Indara, in this episode, she has the one marking on her eye, the black dot.
Mm-hmm.
But in episode 1 of the Acolyte, she's got 2 markings.
Wait,
on her
really?
eye. Yes. And so people are speculating, is that kind of a symbolic gesture of something that happened on Brendok that she feels guilty of, or that she was responsible for? And so that marking is representative of something that happened. Who knows? But that is something we can only speculate about to an extent. But I thought that was very interesting.
Right.
Feels very intentional. Why omit that? Or why omit a second marking? Interesting. Something there. Something there.
Gonna go think about that. But before we go on to anything else, I just want to mention that Indara says Kelnaka instead of Kelnaka. And
Wrong.
that's objectively false.
Sorry, Carrie and Moss.
What? Maybe that's just Osha's point of view. Maybe we can chalk that up to Osha POV. And maybe she just understands kind of that differently. I also want to mention that she says colleagues, which I just felt like was so odd coming from a Jedi, which I understand like they are essentially like working, but like, hey, I'm Master Indara and these are my colleagues.
These are my co-workers.
Kelnaka and Torben, my Padawan. It's just so odd to me. Since like they're kind of like K-pop idols in the sense that their job is 24/7. So Brad's like, God, she brought up K-pop again. But like being a Jedi is like a 24/7 job. So colleagues feels a little empty in terms of feel like not enough.
Yeah.
In terms of a word to use.
Well, I think on the topic of the Jedi, like let's talk about the training scene. The Jedi roll into town. Sol gives his impassioned speech to Osha about how she could be a Jedi if she chooses, right? And so we now go to the Jedi's ship, and we got some good Kelnaka content here, by the way.
Kelnaka.
No, it's
wrong.
It's the Marcion a thing again. I can't do it. I thought it was a really wholesome moment about with Osha going over to Kelnaka and saying hi, and he's just like, I don't know, there's something about the roar and like the gentle vocalizing of a Wookiee that like made me really happy in this episode. It's just like hearing, I don't know, it just like made me think of Chewbacca, and Chewbacca, I love Chewbacca. Like it just made me really happy hearing Wookiees in Star Wars. That's all. But we what's really interesting before they go on the ship is Osha talking about how she can't lie and she wants to speak her heart. And this is kind of the first, not maybe the first, but like one of many parallels in this episode to The Phantom Menace with Anakin and Shmi. And the way that Shmi, when Anakin asks her, am I ever going to see you again? And she says, what does your heart tell you? And that idea of like listening to your heart and following that as your North Star and disregarding anything else, because that's like your true self. And Osha can't refrain from that. I thought it was really clever how Sol was telling her, like, you're getting all the answers right. She's like, no, that wasn't a ship. Dang it. I couldn't lie. I couldn't do it.
Immediately caught on to what she was doing. She was like, he was like, this girl knows what she's talking about. Her midi-chlorian count is through the roof, and there's no way that she doesn't see what's on a data pad or whatever. Like, he's like, so we're just gonna play into this and see how it goes.
Yeah. Also, Torben, speaking of midichlorian, testing her blood, giving her a blood sample. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Like, holy crap.
They already know she's super force sensitive. Yeah.
Wild. I can't believe midichlorians are back on the menu. Let's go. But
the M count.
The M count, right. I guess they have been on the menu, but at least in live action, they're back. We are literally so back. But Sol makes a speech to her, and he says, "The Jedi saw how special I was, and I can see that in you, Osha. I was very scared to leave my family, but when I joined the Jedi, I found out there were many other children like me. But you must have the courage to say what you want, then you must have the courage to tell the truth." And this idea of Osha being special kind of echoes earlier in the episode when Anastasia tells her that she wants Osha to continue to stay special, right? So like both Anastasia and Sol are promising kind of the same thing in a way. And I think in some sense, it's I guess it's like kind of an indoctrination on both sides, because like on one side you have the coven and it's like very isolated and like not wanting to interact with the outside world, and it's very like Path of the Open Hand coded in a way, right? With like the Littles and Marta Row, and it's like you stay here and this is what you know.
Right. Sure.
But on the other side, the Jedi are kind of promising the same thing. It's like Sol is not trying to manipulate her. He's not trying to necessarily gaslight her in a way to like choose to be a Jedi, but like he really in his heart believes like he found the right place as a kid and that he became a better person for it. But like it's complicated, but also Sol has never done anything wrong in his entire life. I love him.
So I want to preface this by saying, but Sol has never done anything wrong in his life and we love him. But also, I think when we watch Sol, I think we have to remember that this is Osha's point of view, right? She clearly thinks very highly of Sol immediately. She thinks of him like very highly and warmly, because, you know, he hands the lightsaber to her. It's a very, that warm gaze looking up at her. That speech is also friendly. That could be 100% the capital T truth. However, I think we do have to remember that we are seeing this through Osha's lens, and she already knows that she wants to be a Jedi. She's so curious. She knows she wants something else in this world. I think it's possible that when we see May's point of view, it becomes much darker. The portrayal of the Jedi becomes much harsher. And so I do wonder whether there was any pointed intention in wanting to get May and Osha into the Jedi. Because we remember Torben saying we thought we were doing the right thing. You know, the Jedi don't take children. All these quotes. But why are they on Brendok? Why are they so worried about this coven training 2 kids on a non-Republic planet? Why are they so worried?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably a great place to transition to, just speaking on perspectives. And, you know, we knew heading into this series that this was a serialized mystery thriller. We were going to have new information unpacked with each episode. It was going to feel like Rashomon, right? Like you see one story and then you see it done differently. And that was kind of the same thing with The Last Jedi, right? Ryan, like with Kylo Ren's perspective, like in The Art of the Last Jedi, he had said Kylo is basically telling the truth about his perception of the moment, right? And I think that's super important to think about with this episode in particular. Noteworthy, the first 2 episode titles have 2 words in them, right? It's a word / a word. This episode is a singular word, destiny. Whose destiny is it? It's Osha's. That is very clear. Again, like this is Osha's episode. This is her perspective. We're getting another episode directed by Kogonada later in the season, episode 7.
Oh, that's got to be May's. Wait.
Will that be May's episode of what happened this night? Will that be the revelations? Will that be more closely aligned with the truth? But again, the truth is from a certain point of view in this instance. It's the perception of that moment for each of those characters and what they're feeling in that moment.
It's so interesting to me I think we'll see this play out if Kogonada also directs May's point of view, and those are just the 2 episodes that he directs. That's so... I didn't even realize. Okay, that's so interesting.
Yeah. Very excited to see what that's all about. But Osha returns to her home. She starts packing to leave. You know, this very emotional moment between her and Anastasia where, you know, the classic Anakin Shmi moment of like, will I see you again? God, that really rang. It made me feel something on the inside. That's a heartfelt moment. But we get to the point where she is leaving her room and May comes in and is like, you can't leave, I'll kill you. Which feels like a very left-hand turn all of a sudden. It feels completely uncharacteristic of May. It's like all of a sudden, what's happening?
She's got a very angry look in her eyes, and she definitely has some anger throughout the episode, or like frustration with Osha throughout the episode, but this is like very malicious for sure.
Yeah, it feels different. And even when she locks the door on Osha and she's outside staring at the fire in her hands, it feels different. It almost feels like a possessed quality. And I don't know, again, like thinking of third parties at play, is she acting on her own volition here? I don't know.
Do you want me to go on my unhinged theory that I'll tamper back just a little bit for the public?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So, I don't necessarily think that it was May. Now, why do I think that? Soul says, and I quote, actually, I don't quote. That's a lie. May started the fire. When she's on the ship after she's been recovered, he says May started the fire. How does he know that May started the fire? How does he know that May started the fire? Other things we also know. Torben has a scar through his eye, a lot of scarring around his eye. We do see him fight Kelnaka in this same setting. However, he also says we thought we were doing the right thing. So that tells me about intention. That tells me about choices, right? And he chooses to kill himself rather than say what they did aloud. Now, my crazy unhinged theory is that like he doesn't necessarily get that scarring from Kelnaka. I do think they fight, but maybe they fight while he is possessed and then he is no longer possessed by the witches. Maybe he is possessed by the witches and this happens. I don't know. But what if it wasn't May? My crazy unhinged theory that will 100% definitely be proven wrong is what if Torben is a Zam Wessel and can shift or give the illusion, like, do you know, like, I'm trying to think of where this is. Oh, in Among Us, when if you have like a certain role, you can look to all the other players. Like if you're playing as blue and you want to put on yellow and be like, haha, it's Sarah, because I always play as yellow. It's Sarah who's murdering all of the Among Us characters. And I've like,
definitely done that, by the way.
I was in the cockpit the whole time. I was doing the nodes. I don't know. I was doing something and I wasn't there. And everybody's like, Sarah, you were there. I literally saw you. What if it's like that? What if it's like that?
When you told me this theory, I sent you the gif of the girl in the backseat of the car with her like two teeth out and like the really like kerfuffled hair.
Right. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, why are you booing me? I'm right.
This might be one of your more unhinged theories that I've ever heard.
I understand that. But what he also says, I've been waiting for you, May. I've been waiting for you, May. Forgive me. We thought we were doing the right thing. Forgive me. I've been waiting for you, May. What does it all mean, Brad? I'm skeptical of Torben. Do I think he's the mastermind in any of this? No. But do I think he was a pawn in all of it? Yes. And do I think he's at the center of all of this? Yes.
Yeah, I do think his role in what happened is probably important considering the lengths that he goes to undo it, at least in his mind. Get that absolution that Chimera says he needs, right? That's a pretty heavy, drastic, full measure that he takes.
That is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, as they would say. Also, I have a question about Torben, and my question about Torben is how did Torben go from a Padawan to master in the last 16 years, from Brendok to the present? Because he took the Barrage vow, and then we know that he hasn't spoken to anybody in over 10 years. He's pretty young here. So how did he go from Padawan to Knight to Master in this time period? When did he take the Barrage vow? What other methods of centering himself did he go through before he took the Barrage vow? These are my thoughts. Thank you.
I think there's some interesting questions there. I don't know if we'll get the answers, but I would take the route of he learned from Indara, and Indara seems like a highly esteemed Jedi master. And perhaps that extra marking on her eye is the number of Padawans she has turned into great Jedi masters. You know, maybe that's the extra thing on her eye.
Even Bernestra, who is trained under Stellan, who is a prodigy by all means and has her own Padawan in her teens, becomes a knight before she becomes a master. I just have some questions about how he got there in this span of time when he wasn't talking to anybody. Thank you.
Yeah, it's curious for sure. And I did notice his eye in the back. Also, Kelnaka absent from the ship, right? I think there's some purpose there. Like, why is Kelnaka not part of that group in the ship when Osha wakes up? Is he in some kind of back to tank? Is he in recovery mode from what happened? Because some of the trailers, like if you look kind of closely, it looks like his eyes are almost the same color and like fullness of Torben in this episode when Anicia is threatening the Jedi to leave and kind of possess Torben. And so that just like, I think that leads us down a route of questions of what truly happened on Brendok and what was the Jedi's culpability in it. The questions are, did the Jedi kill the witches? The question is, were the Jedi possessed to cause chaos and make it look like they were harming people, right? We know that when Indara tells May in the first episode, Jedi don't harm innocents, May says, yes, you do.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's from her perspective. She sees Jedi harm innocents that night, right? So did the Jedi do that on purpose? Were they manipulated to do so? Were they possessed to do so? You know, was there maybe some ill intent from Quarrel, who we know wants to take the blood of the Jedi that night, although Anastasia says no violence, right? Did Quarrel play any part in that manipulation, if the manipulation happened? Also, why is Anastasia's body farther away from the entirety of the other witches, right? I think that's noteworthy. Was Anastasia trying to escape a situation? Was she trying to stop somebody from doing something and got halted burned at that point, right?
They're also not burned. It's not the fire that killed them.
Right. But also, too, earlier in the episode, during the training scene, there is a noise. There is a noise in the shaft in the chasm area where
in
the generator
power
is.
Core.
Yeah. They hear a noise. Quarrel goes over and kind of investigates. And what happened there? Did somebody tinker with something? Because we see it blow up. You know, there's a lot of confusing things, I think, at the end of this episode that are rushed through and done very quickly and very chaotically and very like fractured in a fractured way. And I think that's intentional. We're supposed to feel that sense of like, whoa, like how did we get from like point A to point Z all of a sudden? And we might not get all those answers, and that's kind of exciting. But I think getting the other perspectives will maybe help us piece a little bit more of the truth together. Although we can never be entirely certain, or maybe we will be a little certain at some point. Like whose perspective will be the truth? Like who's going to be the best reliable narrator of this night?
Can I bring up one other thing that has to do with perspective here?
Absolutely.
So we're back to Anastasia. Anastasia has a very interesting a journey of her opinions on Osha's autonomy and Osha's what she wants for Osha and May. Towards the beginning of the episode, when they're talking, she's like, you're special and I want you to stay special. You guys are tied together. You know, you want to go out and do other things, but you're just a kid. You know, those things will change. And I think that's really interesting because a little bit later in the episode, we see the ascension, right? And then Anastasia is very compassionate later to Osha. And she says, what do you want? She goes, I want to go. And then she's like, okay, you want to go, then pull on the thread and pull it. You go. Even though it's going to mess up her entire plan. as wanting to keep the twins together, wanting them to, keep the legacy of the coven. She goes, okay, you go. I'm going to talk to all the elders and all of my advisors, and I will keep your opinion in mind when we do so. And I actually think that is very abrupt. She's clearly very caring and nurturing, at least in Osha's point of view. But she goes from really not wanting to affirm her desire to go to completely affirming her desire to go. And to me, that feels a little suspicious. So I just think that change is it's asking me to ask questions.
And she also does say, I must discuss the situation with everyone here, but we will consider your wish when we do so. We will consider your wish. So is there something that happens after she brings this information to the rest of the coven? Hey, one of our kids is leaving. What transpires?
That's a great point.
Do the people turn on Anastasia?
Right.
Is that why she's separated from the rest of the group? Did they turn on her and leave her to die as almost like an uprising? I mean, I don't know if I would go that far, but it's just a lot of questions. Like, I feel like there's so many routes we could take, and I don't want to necessarily just go with like the very probably true route that the Jedi did something terrible that night and they're not willing to own up to it.
Is a shapeshifter, and
I think there's a lot that could be the case, and I think also like a third party potentially being there and preying on an already vulnerable situation between two groups of people that are at odds is also a huge possibility, right? Like, if there is a Sith or is a dark side user who has been watching from afar, we see in the beginning of the episode, Soul is in the forest watching from behind a tree. Who's to say somebody's not also watching Soul from even farther away?
Right. Absolutely.
Ready to attack. It's exactly the type of thing a Sith would do in the situation.
Mm-hmm.
How Palpatine rose to power. He's like, these types of situations exactly, where there's uncertainty running amok. So I think this is one of the coolest things about the show, is just like leaving these episodes where things aren't just being told to us as the truth. Like, we're left to interpret what that truth is, like what actually happened. And that's like pretty exciting to have that ambiguity and uncertainty when we're so used, I think, to Star Wars, like feeding us just a lot of answers and information and not really like allowing the viewer much agency in deciding for themselves. And I think that's kind of the cooler aspect of this episode. And then the series in general is just like, what is the truth? It's not black and white. It is gray. It is ambiguous.
And it's also saying like the Jedi aren't the moral center of the truth either, which I think is great.
Yeah, exactly. They aren't a reliable narrator in any sense. So yeah, I can't wait to see where this transpires or how this transpires, where it goes to next week. I feel like we're going to be back on the planet with Kalnaka, and then maybe we finally get the long awaited arrival of Tooth Fairy in the forest with the insane amounts of lightsaber battles that we're probably gonna get between some characters that we've been seeing more ads of. I'm a little scared of Yord. For Yord's safety, please do not harm our Yord.
We should be a little scared for everybody.
A little bit, yeah, certainly. But any other final thoughts on this episode? I know we've talked about quite a bit. I think the only other thing that I'd like to point out is before Osha leaves her room, there are 3 plushies on her bed. And somebody pointed out that those plushies do look like nameless. They're blue colored. They're like they're like dino looking creatures. It's around the 32 minute mark, right at 32 minutes. Right. So if that's the case, I love it. And my headcanon, maybe that's the nameless plushie I've been waiting for my entire life and still haven't gotten. Lucasfilm, please release the nameless plushies for the people.
The nameless plushie, the thought about the nameless plushies is so serious, actually. It's kind of really important.
Right. I need it in my life.
Right.
But another small thing I know, or somebody pointed out that I thought was noteworthy in our line of interest here on the podcast. So very important. But any other thoughts from yourself?
I do not think I have anything else on my mind. So I'm just going to leave it be. And if I think about anything, I'll write it down in my little Star Wars notebook and we'll come back next week.
Cool. Sarah, I want to ask you before we close out this episode, what is on my phone right now? Tell me what the object is on my phone.
The Kazrath device.
Wrong. It is the outro of this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode of the Acolyte Appetite. We hope you enjoyed this hour and a half long discussion. I think this episode definitely warranted it. So if you want to hear more from us in the coming weeks, we'll be back for episode 4 next week, talking about the Acolyte. Cannot wait. Have a lot of fun episodes. Next week's going to be a busy one for us. So stay tuned for more interviews and book discussions and TV recaps coming up in your podcast feed, wherever you listen.
We have a Patreon where we are so grateful for the support we get there. So thank you to our patrons: AJ, Ben, Brian, Cheryl, Clay, David, Deborah, Emma, Jennifer, Katie, Knights of Red, Leanne, Logan, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Nicole, Rob, Ruth, Santa, Sky Talkers, Tom, Tover, and Travis. Thank you so much for your support and helping keep the lights on here at Friends of the Force. We're grateful. And thank you to everybody who's joining us for the Acolyte Appetite. We hope you are eating just as well as we are, because we're eating good. And hope you're staying hydrated, because it was 90 degrees and humid out where I live today, and that was a misery. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody, once again. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.
Bye-bye.